I wanted to talk about Black Minds Matter. This week, we have a report coming out that details some of the information I'm going to give to you tonight. Black Minds Matter. I want to make it clear that you heard me when I said minds. In fact, all minds matter, but I want to point out some statistics. Now, the data that you're seeing on your screen, I'll scroll it up for you, is from the official site of the state of New Jersey on in regards to the progress reports of the state of New Jersey schools. So what you're looking at right now is Newark Public School District. This is the math proficiency and ELA proficiency. Just a moment of background. This is taking from the PAR testing, the standardized testing that's required in order for certain federal funds. You'll note that the dates on here 1718, 1819, and 1920. You'll note that 19 and 20 is blank. That is because last year, because of COVID, in the state of New Jersey, there was no standardized testing because the students were all at home because the schools were closed as by order of Murphy. So, why is this important? You'll note if you look at we'll start with the ELA, which is English Language Arts. The English Language Arts for the city of Newark and this is just the public school. This is not the charter schools. This is just the public schools. We have a proficiency rate of 35% in 1718 and a 36.3% in 1819. All right, so that means for at least one third of students of students are proficient. That means 2/3 are either partially proficient or not proficient. Proficient in this case means they understand language arts. They understand enough of it from the test that they are considered knowledgeable enough to have a future in it. You'll look over at math, and math is even worse than that. It's less than 1/3. In fact, it's 1/4 in the case of the federal accountability standards. But that's all not the most significant thing in what you're looking at, John. If you look at the numbers, if you can see it on your screen, the statewide proficiency rate for federal accountability, in other words, what across the state you have is 56%, 57.9% for ELA, and 44.5% in math in 2018-19. So less than half in math and a little bit more than half in language arts are proficient. That's what the records show. Now, you would think, John, with such a low proficiency score, you would have you'd have a low graduation rate in the city of Newark. Well, John, if you thought that, you were wrong, because as you look at the screen that's coming up right now, where is it? There it is. You will note, of course, that the graduation rate, that's what this is, graduation rate, trends and progress, is 4-year graduation. 80.8% of the students of Newark are graduating. So, John, 1/3 of them are proficient in language arts, and 1/4 of them are proficient in math, yet 80% are graduating. Now, if that doesn't throw up red flags, I don't know what will. And we get to why. Why are these scores so low? Because, John, to be clear, there are districts across the state with low scores. Is the test unfair? Is the test incapable? No, John, that's not the case. The problem is it has a lot to do with teaching technique. There's always one of 3 things that causes the failure in this case. So it's either the teachers are bad, the administration that's supporting them is bad, or there's something going on with the families and child. So there's a trifecta of things that could be any one of those 3, and in some cases, it's all 3. But you'll note, John, if you'll think back to me, especially in places like Newark, what could it possibly be in these areas like Newark? I'm glad you asked, brother. Here's some information. If you'll think back to back in the, I mean, the late '60s, what was going on in the '60s, brother? Do you remember what movement was big in the '60s? You
Uh,
remember
Anti-war,
anti-war and the led by Martin Luther King Jr.
civil rights.
Civil rights movement. So this is what we're going to touch on briefly here. Is we're going to be touching on the civil rights movement. Do you know what fueled the civil rights movement, brother? Who fueled it? It was Martin Luther King. But what fueled him? He had to have money coming from somewhere in order to be able to travel around the country. He wasn't a rich man. He had supporters. You know who his supporting network was?
Am I supposed to answer now? Middle class workers.
Yes, because the truth is, we talked about this on the ride back
I didn't
from
know it was
North
going to be a
Dakota.
test.
He
You didn't
knows.
tell me you were going to be a test, or what am I supposed to say?
Well, I mean, there's no test involved. You should remember the answer. So the middle class black families were the ones that
Why am I
were
in eighth grade again?
the middle class, because that's what that's the range I'm teaching. So the middle class black families were the ones who supported Martin Luther King Jr. during the civil rights movement, and they were the main providers of support throughout the entire civil rights movement. So they were the ones, and often they were working. If you'll think back, you're not going to have a white man in this time period working for a black man doing electrical in his house, doing plumbing, doing any of the trades. So who would be doing all the work in black people's houses? It would be black men who would be doing the trade work inside the house, fixing the house, and they would also be making money. And this is one of the highest times that black families were had married couples. So in fact, it was a higher rate of marriage in the black community than any other, including the white community, during the '60s. So we know this up until then. This all changed when the Great Society happened with LBJ. When LBJ comes in there and puts in the welfare and the Great Society, it causes these black families are no longer together as much. We also see there's a movement in education away from trade schools. To this point, trade schools across the board, by the way, not just in the black community, not just in the cities, but everywhere, trade schools were important because people needed to have a farmer in their town, of course, but they also needed people who could weld. They needed people who could. Every town needed workers who could go work in a factory or do some other type of skilled job involving that. So most every school, including the schools in the city, had trade schools. They disappeared starting in the '70s and going all the way up to even today, when they're just starting to come back now. But the important thing is why? Why would they take away the ability for the middle class family to be able to afford to feed themselves? Why would they put in place a system that caused these middle class families to break up? And why, John, are they making people think that they should be going to go to college? Because there's a lot of kids out there, regardless of the color of their skin, who shouldn't be going to college because it's setting them up to have a huge debt. But why are we seeing this movement? Why did all this change? Because if you can answer that, you can answer why the civil rights movement stopped doing anything after the '60s. Sure, there was a little bit here. There's institutions put in place. There's affirmative action, things like that were being pushed. But John, why were there no more major characters like Martin Luther King Jr., who were cruising around trying to force change and make things better? Was it because if you listen to Reverend Sharp and Jesse Jackson and the other collection of race baiters, you'll hear them talk about how unfair things have been for so long. If you listen to Chuck E. Cheese Schumer or Nancy Stretch Pelosi or any of the other, by the way, those are taken from Mark Levin just to give him credit. But all these people, these Democrats, or Obama, Biden, these guys are all saying about how unfair it is for the black community. Where were the Martin Luther Kings for the last 30 years? Answer that question and answer who changed all that, John. Who changed it all? Was it the Republicans who were in charge of the cities, who made education be 30%, illiterate students, or 30%, 25% who could do math? Are the Republicans the one in charge of the cities? Or has it been Democrats in charge of the cities for the last 60 years? Because the educational system of every single major city in the United States, and all the minor cities too, are run by Democrats. And if you want to know why the minority families are being so devastated for the last 40, 50 years, they're being done because of LBJ's his Great Society and all the democratic programs that they've forced on black families since then, John. So black minds matter. And if you're a Democrat, they don't matter at all. Just like we've learned black lives don't matter to Democrats at all.
Black baby
either.
life.
Black baby lives, most definitely. And that's a whole nother segment, brother. It's a whole nother segment. That is probably enough for me tonight. I will, with that.